That's why we talk about Israel, because the Ted Cruz's and Chuck Schumer's and so many others have made it the centerpiece of our foreign policy and of our country.
Hard to disagree with Glenn there. In this podcast, he gets into who's truly obsessed with Israel. We have people on both sides of most issues related to Israel. The strike on Iran is the latest one, the war in Gaza, etc. But who is truly obsessed with Israel? Let's find out. Let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I just want to show you this last extremely revealing clip between Ted Cruz and Chuck Carlson, where things got particularly heated. Ted Cruz got particularly uncomfortable, and you'll never, ever guess, never in a million years, even if I give you 100 guesses, what Ted Cruz decided to imply was truly motivating Tucker Carlson.
Do you think that it's just interesting because what you're now describing in a very defensive way, I will say, is foreign influence over our politics?
No.
And you began, and it's so transparently obvious to everybody. I don't know why you would be embarrassed of it. You've said that you are sincerely for Israel. I believe you. I don't think you have some weird agenda. You seem to be sincere.
By the way, Tucker, it's a very weird thing. The obsession with Israel. When we're talking about foreign countries,
it's hardly an obsession.
You're not talking about Chinese. You're not talking about Japanese. You're not talking about the Brits. You're not talking about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, like, I'm an anti-Semite now. Senator, you're just...
So it is worth noticing that earlier in this podcast, Ted Cruz said he made it his mission when he became a senator to become the most pro-Israel senator in the country. So who between those two cares more about Israel or the Jews or is more obsessed with Israel? You know, he's going to imply that Tucker is motivated by hating the Jews by and large, when he's just questioning how much foreign influence the government of Israel, which doesn't represent all Jews, by the way, and thank God it doesn't, because, you know, there's actually Jews that are critics of this war, like Glenn Greenwald, and critics of Israel that speak out against it. So is Aaron Mattei, so is Jeffrey Sachs, so is Dave Smith, countless examples, Max Blumenthal.
Okay. I just want to, do you remember the clip we just showed you where Ted Cruz said that he went to the U.S. Congress with the stated intention of working, quote, every day to advance and serve the interest of Israel, a foreign country?
Yep, we remember.
And then that very same Ted Cruz announcing that what Barry Weiss does, if they're honest, what Ben Shapiro does, if he's honest, what Chuck Schumer does, and he has been honest, is that their supreme cause, their primary loyalty, is advancing the interest of a foreign government, even though they're American citizens, and in this case, American politicians. Ted Cruz just minutes ago, that was just like in this clip, we separated the clips, but it's just a couple minutes earlier. He's the one who said that he works up every single day to serve the interest of Israel. Every day he said that's what he does. And the reason why so many of us who don't do that talk about Israel a lot is because Israel's the country we give more money in foreign aid to over many decades by far than any other group. We fund their military. We go to war for them. The reason, as General said, we're so hated in the Middle East and that people from the Middle East want to attack our country in large part is because they know that we're the ones who provide Israel with all the weapons that bomb their countries and blow up babies and kill Arabs and Muslims all the time and have done so for decades. They know the United States is behind that. We pay an enormous price financially, militarily, in lives and soft power and reputation, in terms of our own physical security, for dedicating ourselves to the state of Israel for all the reasons we've been showing you. People admit, and the government admit they do. We've been...
Yeah, no question about it. That is the reason. And it's so ironic to see within just a few minutes someone saying that they make it their mission to represent, to, you know, be so pro-Israel, which is essentially representing Israel in the U.S. government, by the way. It's basically saying that. And then to turn around and project upon Carlson that, you know, he's so obsessed with talking about Israel or Israel. Well, we do talk about Israel because it is the focal point of our foreign policy. It's the centerpiece. Israel wanted us to topple Assad. They eventually got that wish with the help of Turks and others that supported that regime change, but USA dumped $15 billion into that. They wanted us to topple Saddam. That was a disaster. A 20-year occupation that still goes on. There's still about 1,000 forces there. It's absurd. Libya as well, and now Iran. Iran is the latest regime change you had to be on board with. And if you talk about it and critique it too much for these neocon war hawks, then you must be, a secret anti-Semite. That is what they imply or say outright. They often do imply it rather than saying it because, people are desensitized to this now.
Arming and financing their destruction of Gaza, what human rights groups all over the world, what I agree as well, will say is the worst crime by far in the 21st century, the worst atrocity, we're talking about forced starvation, all the other things that we've documented. The U.S. government has been right at the heart of that, first under Biden, now under Trump. Nothing changes with in foreign policy when you vote for one party or the other, even though Trump promised a major break from bipartisan foreign policy.
That's true. Regardless of presidential occupant, you still get a lot more of what Israel wants, foreign wars of intervention, regime change operations. And it's not just Israel, it's complicit neocon hawks and Zionists in the U.S. that push for this. It's the military-industrial complex and the deep state and academia and the corporate press, all of which are forming a war coalition to sell this latest war on hoaxes that we saw vanish in terms of their, compelling force back in 2003. They're using the same playbook, and it's so apparent.
That's why we talk about Israel, because the Ted Cruz's and Chuck Schumer's and so many others have made it the centerpiece of our foreign policy and of our country.
It's the focal point.
To the point where we now have civil liberties attacks on free speech in the name of this foreign government. People getting deported and expelled for the crime of criticizing the state of Israel.
Yeah, that's how you turn the right in the U.S., the populist right, the pro-Israel right, to be woke right away. Is just say that there needs to be hate speech legislation, the same thing that liberals called for, but just carve it out only in regard to anti-Semitism. Just make it in regard to anti-Semitism, and then you can get the right-wing masses, many of the MAGA masses, to support that. Curtail freedom of speech if it criticizes, Israel, and then form it as an anti-Semitic statement. That's what various states have done. They've rewritten their civil statutes in terms of this. I think both Georgia and Arizona has done it, and maybe even more states at this point.
Hate speech codes being imposed to prevent you from saying things about Israel or particular Jewish people, what you can say about anybody else, including American citizens or the United States.
Right.
It's infected and contaminated every last aspect of our political life. And so Ted Cruz, who says that he wakes up every day to serve the interest of Israel, this one foreign government, can then turn around to Tucker and say, why are you obsessed with Israel? It must be because you're an anti-Semite. That's the nature of this discourse always.
Yeah.
Conservatives went around for a decade, whining, complaining, screaming. And I was with them a lot on these grievances. The minute you disagree with a liberal on anything, they call you a racist or a misogynist or a transphobe, whatever. You question liberal dogma, and you get accused of being a bigot. That's exactly how most pro-Israel advocates function. The minute you question them, the minute you criticize Israel, you're instantly branded as a bigot and anti-Semite. Exactly the same tactic they pretend to loathe when it's done to them.
Yes, this is the same playbook employed by the woke left, just tuned to the direction that the right prefers. That this is how they suppress criticism. And, some people do fear this, and they won't speak out against Israel and what they're doing and the U.S. connection to Israel, aid to Israel, because their fear is of being branded by this, being canceled at their job, or, defamation, and, the fears that their reputation will be affected. They'll be viewed as an anti-Semite. But, many of us dissidents have just stopped caring. We're so desensitized to it, you might as well throw it at us. And in a way, that word, anti-Semitic, is going by the wayside in the same way that racism and sexism and misogyny and all the things Glenn listed is going. People are catching on to the fact that this is not actual anti-Semitism. This is not actual racism. This is critiquing a foreign government. We wouldn't have that reaction if you critiqued something that Germany was doing, especially if it was, Germany involving the U.S. in one of their, in a war that they're starting. And you were to criticize Germany, and you'd be called, germophobic. It's just insane.
Here's how this played out.
You're not talking about the Brits. You're not talking about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, I'm an anti-Semite now. Senator,
you're asking the questions, Tucker. You're asking, why are the Jews controlling our foreign policy?
Senator,
that's what you just asked.
Hardly saying that, and I have.
That is exactly what you just.
He didn't ask that at all. He is concerned about Israeli influence in the government. And to be clear, Ted Cruz's admitted, representation of Israel within the U.S. government, saying that he wants to defend Israel in the U.S. government. Tucker said nothing about the Jews in the aggregate or the Jewish people or anything like that. Foreign influence is the topic. It's always brought back to this level by the people that want to push this nonsense.
Well, actually, I can speak for myself and tell you what I am saying.
Good.
On behalf not simply of myself, but on of my many Jewish friends who would have the same questions, which is to what extent, and it's interesting you're trying to derail my questions by calling me an anti-Semite, which you are.
I did not.
Of course you are. And rather than be honorable enough to say it right to my face, you are in a sleazy, feline way implying it, or just asking questions about the Jews. I'm not asking questions about the Jews. There's nothing to do with Jews or Judaism. It has to do with the foreign government.
Isn't Israel controlling our foreign policy? That's not about the Jews?
You said...
Yes, I'm here to say that's not about the Jews. That's about a close-knit cabal of evil, murderous regime members that want to enact genocide, and they have in Gaza, and they want to involve the U.S. in another regime change war after all the plagued ones that we got into in the past. That's not about the Jews. This podcast that we're watching right now is hosted by a Jew that's also critical of Israel. So this is just so bogus. So many of the videos I react to are Jewish dissidents that have issues with what Israel's doing and how closely the U.S. is tied to Israel and Israel's war and Israel's, lobbying power in the United States.
I'm asking
And by the way, you're the one that just called me, I think, a sleazy feline. So let's be clear.
It's sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite, which you just did.
No, I just said, why is that the only question you're asking? You answer it. Give me another reason. If you're not an anti-Semite, give me another reason why the obsession is Israel.
I am in no sense obsessed with Israel. We are on the brink of war with Iran, and so these are valid questions.
But you're not asking about Iran or the
If I can
Ayatollah.
finish, you asked me why I'm obsessed with Israel.
Yep.
3 minutes after telling me that when you first ran for Congress, you elucidated one of your main goals, which is to defend Israel.
Yes.
Exactly. I'm so glad he caught this in the moment, but it's so true.
And I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel. I don't see a lawmaker's job as defending the interests of a foreign government, period. Any government, including the ones that my ancestors come from. So that's my position. That does not make me an
Amen. My ancestors come from Germany. I don't want to elect representatives to Congress that represent Germany. And I don't, by the way. I mostly don't vote. But that's clear. You don't want foreign influence in your government. What's next? That we elect people to represent the World Health Organization in our government? The WEF? The UN? NATO? Where does this stop? These people just want to pervert the localism and sovereignty that we have, at least to some extent, in smaller localities, by perverting it.
anti-Semite, and shame on you for suggesting otherwise, and I mean that.
Okay. This is the one thing that I really hate more than anything is this kind of cowardice in discourse. If you want to call someone an anti-Semite, just call them that. Say, I know that you hate Jews. I believe that you hate Jews. I believe that you're operating from bigotry. The reason you're questioning my loyalty to Israel isn't because you think, in reality, that the job of a U.S. politician is to serve the interests of the American people rather than a foreign government. It's because you hate Israel, you hate Jews, you are anti-Semite. Okay, at least if you say that, people will see what you're doing. But they very rarely do that. I mean, people online will do that because who cares? They say anything, often anonymously. But obviously he was implying very strongly, using innuendo and insinuation, that the reason Tucker Carlson is questioning AIPAC, questioning the loyalty that Ted Cruz said he has to Israel and the propriety of that, the necessity of going to war for Israel and Iran, fighting alongside them against their worst enemy. He's insinuating and implying that it's because Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite who is obsessed with Jews. But then when Tucker Carlson says, you're calling me an anti-Semite, Tucker says, I didn't say that. Just asking you, why are you so obsessed with the Jews? Of course he was saying that, but he's such a coward. I hate it when people use insinuation and innuendo to accuse somebody else of bigotry.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Glenn here, and it's worth noticing that it was Cruz who first conflated Judaism with Israel. When Tucker brought up the concerns about the influence from a foreign government in our own, Ted Cruz leapt just to that accusation, like, why did you just asked about the Jews? And that had nothing to do with his line of reasoning. This was Ted Cruz first, leading this down an absurd trail that we see play out in so many political debates that surround these things.
And then give themselves plausible deniability. I didn't say that you hate Jews. Why are you so sensitive? When, of course, that's exactly what he was implying. And this is the way the discussion always ends up. It always ends up here. You can watch your government send billions of your dollars, as you do every year, to this foreign government. You can watch your own government be filled with politicians who you elected to serve your interests, admit that their primary responsibility, whether it's because God tells them to or whatever other reason they might have, is to serve the interest of a foreign government that Ted Cruz says he wakes up every day to fulfill. And the minute you ask a question, I'm like, wait a minute, why are we doing so much for this foreign government? Why do we send all our money there? Why do we give them all our arms? Why do we fight all their wars for them? Why do we sacrifice our interests for them? The ending of that discussion is you are an anti-Semite.
Yeah, it always goes to that point, obviously every single time. And look, their goal isn't to limit discussion about Israel and the supposed oppositional obsession with Israel. All that they would have to do for that is to cut aid to Israel, or threaten to cut it off, or don't involve U.S. in these catastrophic world affairs that never lead us to a better place. What they're doing in Gaza is criminal. They want to drag the U.S. into this war in Iran, which they've already done to some extent, by the way. It seems like the negotiations with Iran, at least to some extent, were sabotaged by people within the Trump administration, and Trump had advance notice of this strike and didn't act to prevent it or condemn or criticize Netanyahu for undermining what were supposedly our foreign policy goals, which was to negotiate with Iran to curtail their nuclear program. But now you hear the same tired and true propaganda. But like I said, the reason we talk about Israel is how much funding they get, how closely at the hip we're tied to their foreign policy goals, regardless of what U.S. and Americans' foreign policy goals is. And it's not just the Israelis. It's the American government. It's our deep state. It's the military-industrial complex. It's cretins and neocons in our own government that pervert our foreign policy to the agenda of this other country. So it's not even just about the Israelis. It's about people within the United States. That's where the real power is. They have the choice to cut aid to Israel, and they don't. Israel would not be able to demand that without their lobbying power.
The last time any president meaningfully defied the orders of the Israeli government in AIPAC, Ronald Reagan did it. There's a memo of his saying when Menachem Begin, Prime Minister of Israel in the 1980s,
who was a terrorist at one point, by the way, a literal terrorist,
was bombing southern Lebanon and killing huge numbers of civilians, massacring civilians. Reagan called him up and said, "This is disgusting what you're doing. It's like a Holocaust, and I demand that it end." And 20 minutes later, Menachem Begin called him back and said, "We're stopping the war." Reagan stood up to Israel all the time. But the real conflict became when George H.W. Bush was president. People like James Baker and Brent Scowcroft, who are in the realist school, like John Mearsheimer of foreign policy, were his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. And they had a very simple view, which was it's in the interest of the United States to foster an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians that would create a two-state solution where a Palestinian state exists, coexists side by side an Israeli state, because that will finally end this endless, very vitriolic conflict.
And he was called an anti-Semite for that, by the way. Baker and Bush and others in his administration.
That prevents the United States from doing business in the Middle East because everybody in the Middle East blames the United States, rightfully so, for the repression of the Palestinians. And so the United States government across partisan lines for decades had the view, our interest is that you have a two-state solution. And the anger of the Bush 41 government was, we keep telling you we don't want you to expand more settlements in the West Bank because the West Bank doesn't belong to you. The West Bank is going to be part of the Palestinian state and the deal we're trying to foster. And when you allow your citizens to expand their settlements in a part of the area that doesn't belong to you, it makes a two-state solution more difficult. And no matter how much we keep telling you that it undermines our interests, you keep doing it anyway.
And they have expanded their West Bank settlements. In fact, the hardest core Zionists in the U.S. and Israel wants them to continue expanding. I think they already have about 60% of it. And it expanded after they stopped the quote-unquote occupation of Gaza when they brought troops away from there in 2005, I believe. Many of those forces went straight to the West Bank settlements. So this has been duplicity the entire way. Glenn is exactly right.
And if you keep doing things that we're telling you undermines our interests, we're not going to keep funding you. We're not going to give you loan guarantees that you need. And that threat from the Bush administration saying, if you don't stop these policies that hurt us, we're not going to keep giving you loan guarantees, caused a major explosion on a bipartisan basis in Congress from the Ted Cruzes and the AIPACs and the Schumers who say our number one job is to serve Israel. And there was a major scandal accusing Jim Baker and Brent Scowcroft of being anti-Semites. And you know who led that campaign?
Clinton.
Bill Clinton and the Democrats. When Bill Clinton ran as the Democratic nominee against the sitting incumbent president in 1992, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton ran around the United States accusing Bush 41 and James Baker and Brent Scowcroft of spawning anti-Semitism, of encouraging violent attacks against Jews, because they were questioning the state of Israel, being insufficiently supportive to the state of Israel. Jim Baker got smeared in headlines all over the country.
And this campaign worked. You can see within it the seeds of what's playing out now as the scheme to call critiques of Israeli policy anti-Semitic, despite the fact there was no basis for that it was anti-Semitic. No, this is saying that Israel's going overboard and enacting the wrong policy when we're funding Israel. But because they said that, and by the way, I'm no big fan of Bush Sr. and James Baker, by the way, for the most part, that is what happened. And because they were able to get away with that, Clinton won in 1992. He became president in early 1993. They had this as a blueprint for success for future foreign policy goals. You can just call critics of Israel anti-Semitic and hope it sticks. And it really did stick for a long time, especially without the rise of the new media and the independent media and people that are so, again, desensitized to this now.
He was a very respected foreign policy advisor, lawyer. It basically destroyed his reputation overnight. They just branded him an anti-Semite. And ever since then, that was 1991, thanks to Bill Clinton and the Democrats and plenty of people in both parties and the media, everybody understood from that point forward, if you even question why we do so much for Israel, even when it harms our interests, your reputation will be destroyed. You'll be branded anti-Semite. And that put an end to any real attempt by any president to defy Israel. To his credit, Obama entered the Iran deal over Netanyahu's vicious objections.
Yeah.
Did a couple of other things as well, but he
That's how you know it was the only good thing Obama ever did, by the way, in terms of foreign policy, is because it was over Netanyahu's objections.
also signed a deal on his way out, promising $4 billion a year to Israel with Netanyahu. And so this always has been what has destroyed Americans' ability to question any of this, calling people an anti-Semite. You just saw Ted Cruz do it the most cowardly, slimy way possible to Tucker Carlson. And I think, finally, and this is the one note of optimism on which I will end, is that people are tired of that. They got tired of the liberal tactic.
Yes.
Just running around calling everybody anti-Semite all the time, calling everybody a racist all the time, rather calling them a misogynist. And everybody understood that the more you just throw that term around, the less impact it has, the less meaning it has. And so it wore off, and there was backlash against it. Like, go ahead, call me a racist, call me a misogynist. You've drained those terms of meaning. They're just weapons.
Yeah, the right is trying to revive this strategy, but it wore off when the liberals did this. When everything was indicative of racism, or an opinion I don't like is sexism, or you're racist, or you're alt-right, whatever other words that the liberals wore off, the Republicans are taking that playbook and applying it as it applies to Israel and anti-Semitism. You can see this right now going on.
Cynical weapons that you employ to end debate and prevent questions about your views. And that is 100% done, even more so from pro-Israel conservatives or pro-Israel Democrats, to end any questioning about the state of Israel and our loyalty to it. And I think people are at the point with independent media watching Israel blow up babies every single day and commit atrocities with our weapons and our arms in Gaza, of being told we can't talk, we have to lose our jobs, we have to submit to heightened hate speech laws and codes on college campuses. People get fired from college campuses if they question this foreign government. People are like, wait a minute, why is this foreign government dominating our country so much? And people aren't scared anymore of being called an anti-Semite.
Yeah, that's the silver lining. That's sure a source of hope. I said those same words a little bit earlier to the most part, but I'm with Glenn on this completely. It is wearing off, whether employed by the left or the right, by liberals or conservatives, by Democrats or Republicans. People are sick of it. It does carry some weight in some circles, and we're seeing that in how, Trump is responding to, legal aliens that are here legally, questioning Israel or criticizing Israel. We saw that play out in the Mahmoud Khalil story, but also states are rewriting their codes to some extent. But I don't think it has as much power over people as it would have even 5 years ago. I think he's right.
And that's why Tucker Carlson was able to go and do what he did with Ted Cruz. I don't believe Tucker Carlson could have or would have done that when he was at Fox.
Yeah.
The fact that Tucker himself is not Jewish makes him more vulnerable to that accusation, but by no means does being Jewish shield you from it. I can guarantee you that.
Yes, he can. Glenn can guarantee you that more than anyone else, because he is Jewish, and he's been called an anti-Semite for having the views he does toward the Israeli-U.S. relationship. And so has Norman Finkelstein, and so has Max Blumenthal, and Aaron Mattei, and Jeffrey Sachs. All of these Jewish Israel dissidents that don't want to support Israel endlessly are branded an anti-Semite. It's just inevitable. If you thought that would stop someone from calling people that, you're wrong. Dave Smith, too. They've called him that, too.
And it used to be that being branded that was career destroying. It no longer is. And that has opened up for the first time these kinds of questioning, these kinds of debates. And when you finally open it up and shine sunshine on it, that's when you finally start to see the truth. That's when things start to, all the mold and dirt and things hidden beneath the floorboards can finally be detected and washed away. And I think polls show clearly that that's what's happening with Americans' views of Israel, and particularly our loyalty to it. The problem is it's probably a little bit too late to prevent Donald Trump from getting even more involved on behalf of Israel in the war in Iran, if that's what he seems inclined to do and if that's what he ends up doing. But the good thing is this is clearly unsustainable in the long term. If I were Israel, although I'd be happy for the moment that Trump is going to fight a new war for you, is already doing so, really. It's only a question of how much more he does it.
Yep.
They might be happy in the short term. In the long term, I think it's done more to endanger Israel, those kind of tactics, than anything else that Israel opponents could possibly dream of.
Yeah, that's right. What would stir up more animosity toward Israel than branding any critic of it an anti-Semite, or lambasting criticism of the genocide in Gaza as being anti-Semitic if you don't support that? It's nonsense. The people that have this line of reasoning and this argumentation style are doing more of a disservice to Israel than they could possibly imagine. And I really like the fact that Glenn had that silver lining there at the end. We're not even living in the same world as we were 5 years ago when this was career destroying, and more so the further you go back in time. But because of the new media, the rise of alternative media, we aren't just having all of our information filtered through the guise of Fox News and MSNBC and the Washington Post, the Washington Times, etc. We have a new dissident-oriented media that won't put up with it, doesn't care anymore, and just keep, exposing this nonsense like Tucker did. Tucker was amazing in that interview. There's a few things I think he could have been a little bit better on personally, and that's nitpicky. But he did such a good job at pushing back against Cruz in a way that you just don't see play out these days. That was the most contentious debate I've ever seen from him, and I love the pushback that he had. He was armed with facts, and, Ted Cruz went down the same Zionist trope lines that we've all heard. All dissidents and anti-war activists and libertarians have always heard it. We've heard it our entire lives. And we'll keep hearing it. But you know what? That's all right, because some truth is being exposed. Glenn Greenwald likened this to, sunlight showing through the floorboards, and that's exactly right. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Is Glenn Greenwald right? Is it the neocons that are more obsessed about Israel than those who critique Israeli policy and the U.S. relationship with Israel? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please consider supporting me as a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. I'd greatly appreciate the support. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.